As we find ourselves at the precipice of another pivotal juncture in the world's economic trajectory, it's worth pausing to consider the high-wire act that policymakers around the globe are attempting to perform. With precision and dexterity, they must navigate the ever-shifting winds of inflation, employment, growth, and a constellation of geopolitical factors that could upend even the most carefully calculated maneuvers. At the heart of this tightrope walk is the Federal Reserve, that enormously consequential body whose every gesture and utterance shapes the financial fortunes of nations. And at its helm, Jerome Powell, the economic equivalent of a circus ringleader, part soothsayer, part ironsmith, furiously pumping the billows to keep his troupe of monetary minstrels aloft. The last year has been one of dramatic escalations as the Fed waged an unrelenting war against the scourge of runaway inflation, ratcheting interest rates to heights unseen in over 2 decades. A bitter medicine, to be sure, but one deemed necessary to restore that delicate equilibrium between stable prices and robust employment that is the elusive holy grail of modern central banking. Now, with promising signs that the inflationary flames are dimming, the Fed's performance is poised to enter a new, equally precarious act. For Powell must navigate the perilous passage from economic constriction to cautious renaissance without sending the entire ensemble crashing to the ground below. His signal, expected in the coming days, will be to prepare the audience for an overture of lower borrowing costs in the months ahead. A deft maneuver, to be sure, but one fraught with risks that even the most experienced of economic conjurers would be wise to respect. The data thus far has been encouraging, a gentle downdraft in price pressures coupled with continued economic vigor. Yet the Fed's overarching desire for certitude, that inflation will indeed continue its glide path towards the 2% bullseye, means every new monthly ballet of figures is scrutinized with the fevered intensity of a rap video going viral. And perhaps no monthly review is more breathlessly awaited than the Employment Situation Report, which takes center stage this Friday. The forecasts call for a stalwart but more lazily loping advance of 178,000 new jobs, while the unemployment rate is expected to hold at 4.1%, a few munchkins short of the absolute fullest employment Oregon Trail wagon, but certainly nothing to sneeze at either. Wild cards, like Texas' recent hurricane barrel aberration, loom ominously, as do the health of America's beleaguered manufacturing sector and the creature comforts that will be on display when the curtain rises on the Conference Board's consumer confidence metrics. Lest we become too America-centric in our viewpoint, it's worth noting that the economic choreographers elsewhere are likewise attempting to strike those finely calibrated poses that will keep their respective troops endpoint and spinning across the globe stage. In the frozen north, the statisticians manning Canada's statistical mashup will be crunching away to limn the contours of their nation's economic dance. A projected modest 0.2% bump in May's GDP, with a preliminary sachet at June's numbers as well. The icy airs of Ottawa and the fevered divans of the Bank of Canada all await, with bated breath, these latest cipherings to see if the Great White North is indeed hitting its marks. A dervish of other economic data points will be spinning into view across the week's performances. Every zig and zag in Europe's inflation stats and growth metrics will entrance the continentals like the climactic fouette of a Russian ballet. The Bank of Japan's much-anticipated pitch to lessen its monthly bond-buying binge will have the yen's army of pundits wrapped. And those eternal societal bellwethers, the price of a McEverything in Australia, the megaton blast of industrial output in Asia's great workshop economies, and that profoundly telling measure of monetary sinew known as Pakistan's benchmark rate will keep the analysts' smart pens scratching feverishly. But amidst this grand burlesque of economic theatrics, one production bids fair to be the week's true tour de force, the Bank of England's rate decision. Here, investors place even odds on the Strand's monetary mandarins sticking the landing of a 50 basis point dismount from the 16-year high plateau of 5.25% borrowing costs. A make-or-break maneuver to relieve the sclerotic arteries of British finance without igniting a fresh inflation surge. In the quiet pocket of hushed anticipation beforehand, Chancellor Rachel Reeves will don the persona of Eeyore, cast as the theatrical raincloud warning of broke and broken public finances. Housing, health, water, education, defense, transport, and migration will all come in for gloomy side-eye glances of apprehension. Yet, for all the doom-mongering, when the spotlit instant finally arrives, the money mavens of Threadneedle Street are widely expected to unpack a restrained, measured script. Their actions may gesture towards a gradual unbending of the fiscal hairpin curve, but amid ample dollops of dovish sweetener promising that any easing moves will be well telegraphed in advance. After all, The bards of the pound can hardly be seen losing the plot after penning 16 years of exemplary price stability. If the old lady of Threadneedle promises to be the headliner, the supporting players in Europe's monetary theater are unlikely to go unnoticed. Take the monthly data kinetics on tap from Principali herself, the European Central Bank. While her grandstanders remain quiet as monastic initiates this week, the growth and inflation numbers for July are still primed to seize the audience's gaze like a juicy Wagnerian choirboy hitting his highest notes. The euro area's output is tipped to reveal a deliciously slow second quarter softening. Just a gentle step back from first quarter's brisker moves, like an easing into summer's languor. While even its seemingly pedestrian 0.2% pace could provoke hair-pulling grimaces of dismay from the usual suspects belching jeremiads about economic stagnation. But, do not such doomsayers ever pause to appreciate subtle stationary graces of the dance? As for inflation, the VIG reckons those awkward energy price gyrations will hold steady at 5%, while the oh-so-important core metric is foretold to drift infinitesimally lower, fluttering down to 2.8% like an errant feather catching the breeze from the upper balconies. A few aisles over from these European grand gignal spectacles, the Czech and Hungarian national troops are bidding to steal some limelight. In Prague, the presumption is an economic growth bump will greet the stats impresarios like a well-timed standing ovation. While for Budapest's economic choreographers, this is their chance to strut some dazzling non-oil activity stats ammunition, one assumes, for unleashing continued rate cuts with confidence and aplomb. Moving east from these intimate little recitals, we find ourselves agape at the Saudi spectacle. For here, the OPEC titans are twirling out an economic contraction reprise for a fourth sullen quarter in succession. A regrettable outcome, surely the critics will cluck. But look deeper and the seasoned eye will spy that the desert kingdom is transitioning to new steps, an energetic diversion of its industrial calisthenics away from the familiar oil gusher plies, towards bolder entrepreneurial forays. Novel moves cribbed and borrowed from the more vigorous Broadway hoofers. Does anyone else detect the slightest whiff of stagecraft about this contraction interlude? A fleeting suggestion that such periodic revenue trough moments, when amplified for effect, might serve to gird the reformist loins with fresh resolve? To concentrate national energies on the diversification mandates that will define a post-petroleum age. But perhaps such musings stray too far into novelistic embroidery. For the hard statistical facts are indeed what they are. And those portend a Saudi overall economy still bowed in deference to oil's cyclical scripts. For all the bold statements about pivoting beyond the petrochemical harlequins, this energy behemoth's dance card remains largely inscribed with the familiar refrains. Dipping further south into the African continental expanse, at least one pocket of economic stagecraft appears more genuinely conceived. For in Mozambique, the central bank seems poised to deliver an encore rendition of rate cuts for the fourth consecutive movement this year. A quantitative dance à quatre temps, if you will, underpinned by the firm foundation of tamed inflation hovering demurely around 3%. While such polite petit bourgeois refrains may lack the revolutionary fervor of the raging monetary mashpits to the north, they at least bespeak a steadying hand on the economic tiller. Monetary minders neither spooked by ephemeral inflationary wraiths, nor cowed into malign neglect by growling austerity ghouls. Just steady as she goes, old chap. A similar steady hand seems to guide the economic barks across Mexico's waters this week. All signs from the midstream data parse suggest that Latin America's neo-Aztec powerhouse maintained positive economic momentum through the second quarter. Not an unalloyed triumph, to be sure. The soothsayers still see growth trailing the central bank's forecasts like an opening night bouquet falling just short of the prima ballerina's toes. But before getting too tangled up in future tense fretting, let's pause to appreciate just how far Mexico has pivoted from the pandemical depths of 2020. When all the economic choreography was thrown into desuetude by COVID's inimical caudillos, who could have foretold the vigor of this return to trinational form? Yes, headwinds loom menacingly for the quarters ahead, but the current dance remix is undeniably buoyed by the sheer joy of having mastered those brutally challenging opening salvos. Lest we forget, the graceful pivots of renewal and economic renaissance must always be grounded in the bedrock of employment. It is the labor market metrics that provide the true measure of an economy's core strength and flexibility. And on this crucial front, the regional employment data due to strut onto stage this week cuts a somewhat bifurcated figure. In Brazil and Mexico, We have history's grand tragedian talents rendering the roles of tight, formidable labor markets holding center stage through sheer dramatic gravitas. Watchful colossuses bellowing their lines with a preternatural power that commands respect, if not always awe or affection. By contrast, the labor forces of Chile and Colombia are still finding their roles as undeniable supporting players, not limp youths, not at all, but still awaiting their star turns, their inevitable promotions into the exalted strata of maximum employment. The playbills promise ever more prominent billings in the seasons ahead, but for now, they remain contented ensemble members, happy just to revel in the spotlight's glow. Brazil's own statistical chorales will take up the baton with their June industrial output cantata. While those expecting a masterwork on the order of Beethoven's Ninth may come away disappointed, the close listeners will surely appreciate the performance's nuances and subtle phrasings. As for Colombia, its central bank will be releasing the latest draft of its quarterly monetary policy script. With any luck, it may offer hidden clues about potential plot twists or recastings to come. Rumor has it, the moneycrats are keen to sneak in an upbeat cameo for agricultural commodities. For all the sound and furied economic signaling across the region, however, a few isolated statistical backwaters persist in their stubborn quietude. Peru, for example, deigns only to let slip July's CPI murmurings. Its central bank evidently remains more than content to hold its tongue for now, while core inflation readings remain obstinately elevated like a bitter dowager unwilling to make her exit. But if some economies seem locked in suspended animation this week, others are poised to deliver dramatic rate moves filled with Baroque flourishes and scene-chewing bravura turns. Take Chile's central bank, for instance. On the surface, a ninth consecutive rate cut seems almost boringly preordained. A humble background chorus progression to 5.5%, as matter of fact as Senor Gomez ordering his usual 3 eggs over easy. Yet behind the curtain, tensions loom. Recent inflation flare-ups have the bank's monetary choreographers sweating bullets, wary of sacrificing their hard-won reputations for prudence on the bonfire of ill-timed penny-pinching. The hawks and doves could be headed for a brief backstage tussle over the tempo of financial loosening, with the voice of Governor Rosana Costa ultimately determining just how deeply the three-quarters time cuts will crescendo. Down Mexico way, the central bank cabals of Banxico are expected to embrace their dovish tendencies with a less conflicted ardor. For them, it's nothing as profane as a rate cut, more a solemn delivery of another judicious 50 basis point installment, leading them ceremoniously down towards 10.75% like a platonic vision of perfect monetary guardianship. The doves may coo with delight at being rewarded for their patient counsel, while President Petro and his finance minister Bonilla will doubtless savor this latest validation of their preferred policy porridge not being too hot, nor too cold, but just right. If only those mythic double-dealing Goldilockses were as financially secure and spiritually centered. Yet if Banxico seems to glide with relative insouciance, the very air surrounding Brazil's central bank decision seems thick with tension. For here, the usually unflappable Roberto Campos Neto finds his policy ambit suddenly constrained in surprising ways. On one side, inflation prints and forecasts are engaging in a spirited broma, seemingly attempting to spike the monetary punch bowl before the party's scarcely started. While on the other, President Lula's ascendant political camp has been openly campaigning for rate cuts as aggressive as a Rio Carnival dancer's rump shakes. In the end, though, we can surely count on Senor Campos Neto to reprise the role of uncompromising monetary probity, for which he has become so justly renowned. The smart money expects no more than a judicious pause at 10.5% this week, a staunch refusal to be rattled by either inflationary phantasms or Sambianji politicians hustling for easy street cred. For as this epic economic ballet plays out its opening movements across the hemispheres, certain eternal verities continually reassert themselves, the invisible rhymes and paradoxical harmonies that unite American finance with its emerging market brethren. The durable choreographic traditions honored, even as unexpected new movements importune for inclusion, and the sheer, visceral dynamism of intellectual and cultural cross-pollination that renders each economic interaction vastly more profound than its arid statistical synopsis could ever convey. Whether swinging our analytical kaleidoscope from the vigorous motoring of Brazil's raging monetarists to the impeccable bathroom atrise of Albion's finance custodians, what becomes resoundingly clear is this: we are all merely musicians improvising against an ancient overture of scarcity and abundance. co-creators trying to breathe new life into the ancestral lays about desire, industry, and the ceaseless tension between what is and what we crave to become. The economic metrics we so hungrily consume are just the dry husks encasing the real drama, the rich sauces of human longing and aspiration that shape our universal search for sustenance and security. So as the week's statistionic tableaus take the stage and vie for our attentions, let's pause to savor something more than the arid box scores about to unfold. Something ineffably grander, more resilient, and more enduring than any singular set of accounting ciphers could possibly capture. For in the end, all these dizzying monetary moves are but scattered fragments of a much more primal human candor. The oldest story ever told, about tribes and kinships binding together to tame the wilderness and confront the unknown. Economic data is simply the latest evolution of those ancestral grunts and hand signals that first allowed our forebears to coordinate their hunt and share their spoils. The choreography of central banks adjusting their rates? Just tomorrow's version of elders sitting around a campfire, signaling the timing and direction of the next day's expedition. The choreography of continents shifting their policies and exchanging their tribal totems? Simply the newest permutation of ancient ways, the global sweep and sway of human ambition and interchange, renewed for an ever-changing world. So let the numbers dance on and be analyzed to the nth differential. Let the policy savants strut whatever their latest statistical peacockery decrees. For ultimately, the grandest economic theatrics will always be overshadowed by the majesty of our ceaseless human strivings. Those primal yearnings that first fired the kiln of civilization will continue to outshine and outlast every hyper-intellectualized attempt to diagram their essence. The audacious dreams that sent our ancestors marching out of the nutrient-rich rifts of ancestral Africa to reclaim a planet, those ambitions burned with a creative integrity that could reduce our most ingenious modern models and derivatives to so much forgotten ash. The choreographic flights of monetary fancy we gawp at today, the ritualized pivots between tightening and loosening, inflating and contracting, are simply the current acts in an endless human mask stretching back into the misty epochs before numerical notation itself was conceived. What really merits analysis is not the economic data stream's ephemeral ebb and flow, but rather the stubborn, persistent idea that propels that data into being in the first place. The idea of human cooperativity, audaciously believing we can bargain with scarcity through collective ingenuity, negotiating safe passage through the thickets and pitfalls not by fang and claw, but by bond and pact and sacred vow. For truly, my friends, what force on this earth could be more powerfully subversive of naturalistic ordaining than the very idea of economics? What conspiracy against the gale of chance and maxim of tooth-and-nail survivalism could be more profoundly seditious than this millennial human wager? That fallible, ape-descended rationalists might one day recognize patterns in the swirling dynamism of the universe, and then hauntingly bend those patterns to align with their utopian reveries. When one really regards the economic choreographies unspooling across continents and cultures this week, one is observing nothing less than the latest battle of the memes. The eternal poetics of human lucubration furiously transcoding between numbers and speech, domiciling those chimeric notions in institutions and policies, which in turn catalyze new waves of scarcity dilemmas demanding fresh solutions. Is it any wonder that our finest theory-bound academics and empirical soothsayers still struggle to model and predict these metalogical dynamos with perfect fidelity? We are but seekers squinting in the presence of immortal forces, the collective REM hallucinations of species singularly obsessed with its own delirious imaginary. And so the monetary sachems and their powwows of statistical augury will come and go. Their stage-managed dramatics will spawn offspring of successors and displacements in endless mitotic profusion. Yet the greater choreic romance of human economic striving will only swell and intensify across the continents and epochs. Ever more intricate steps will be conceived and mastered. Ever more dizzying production numbers will accrue as technologies and networks accelerate the metabolic churn. Stately classical movements will echo and admix with raucous street blasts until all perception of pristine origin or singular authorship is finally submerged in a celebratory riot of pan-global call and response. We are fluent in a language of scarcity metrics today. But the evolving grammar of our kind is inscribed in city grids and market exchange rates and monetary policies just as surely as uttered by word of mouth. Just as the first grunts of liquids and laryngeals ultimately gave rise to the world's litanies of lyric and literature, so too will the economic hieroglyphs of this moment beget new encoded ciphers that may ultimately render our present numeric argos as quaint and simplistic as the hollow bone whistles of Paleolithic hunters. For in the infinite expressive striving of a bipedal ape convulsed with reason's fevers, the true revolutionary act is never found in the data outputs themselves, but in the conceptual breakthroughs that first instructed us how to generate those outputs. The deeper eureka being that let us redream scarcity as negotiable condition, rather than brute deterministic fate. So let this week's parade of monetary signals and benchmarks play out as it will one more dazzling pas de chat in the eternal economic ballet. Savor it for its Oompa Loompa charm, but reserve your true awe for the greater incantationary score still unfolding all around us. That primordial, forever insurgent opus keeping rhythm with the heartbeats of a strange contingent soul breed who had the singular audacity to legislate against the winnowing strictures of hunger itself. An unsung resistance movement for whom no dogma or blanco sheet ever seems to suffice, always pressing on to script wilder, more ambitious subversions of environmental circumstance, to author new utopias into being through the sheer orgiastic force of willful and sustained imagining.